This is the primal scream of a dying regime.
Pray for our enemies, because we're going medieval on these people. You're just not got a free shot on all these networks lying about the people. The people have had a belly full of it. I know you don't like hearing that. I know you try to do everything in the world to stop that, but you're not going to stop it. It's going to happen.
And where do people like that go to share the big lie? MAGA media. I wish in my soul, I wish that any of these people had a conscience.
Ask yourself, what is my task and what is my purpose? If that answer is to save my country, this country will be saved.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
It's Monday, 24 August, year of our Lord 2026. Jason Killmeyer from Daily Caller is our guest. Jason, want to continue on? By the way, Stephen Miller's really been the chief architect under President Trump for a decade now, almost, for immigration policy, sealing the border, internal enforcement. Would he be the czar, or would be somebody named as czar that report to Stephen, and then Stephen would report to the president on this? Is that because you're making a pretty definitive decision in your analysis to say, look, if you want to get serious about this, you got to take it out of the Department of DHS, which is massive and has so many mandates. You've got to prioritize this by putting it in the West Wing, naming a czar. And of course, you're in the West Wing, you're cheek by jowl with the Oval Office, so you can go down there every day because President Trump's going to be calling you to say, hey, give me the numbers, how many flights are leaving, et cetera. Is that why you're calling it to be shifted over to the White House under some czar? And would that be Stephen Miller or somebody that will report to Stephen Miller?
I think very likely Mr. Miller will be in another even higher position here in a few months. So the way that I look at it is it's someone who would report to him. And DHS right now has grown capacity, exponentially in the first year and a half, 2 years of the administration. There are people working like maniacs at ICE 7 days a week to try to build this thing. My argument is a DHS alone approach will not be sufficient for the scale. So for that to happen and us not to get bogged down in like the interagency stuff, this has to go all the way to the top. So that's why, one, it needs to sit at the White House from a practical perspective, but two, because this is a function of political will. And let me give you an example, Steve. Like, you mentioned the TPS folks, right? There's another population that you may remember the Biden administration invented called CHNV, and where they just decided that they could, quote unquote, mass parole people into the country, and we flew them in ourselves. We own Venezuela right now, and yet we're still bargaining with Venezuela over how many people they will take back of their own citizens, right? That's one phone call or one tweet from the president to get that done. So that's why this needs to be run out of the White House.
Jason, let me ask you before I let you go. And I want, if Mo and Grace and everybody can push out and everybody be a force multiplier. In fact, go back to the first piece, because both of them are great and they're even better when read into kind of conjunction with each other but even in the headlines, because correct me if I'm wrong, we could get the Title V very quickly from the White House, executive order, you could call for it. You've got the money's already been allocated, already been authorized. You've got Stephen Miller in the West Wing prior to any kind of new job he would take. You've got, I know this from internal enforcement at ICE, you literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of people of internal enforcement that would gladly sign up and love to be the regional commanders and would know the logistics. Why do you say after the midterms? All this is available now, and it's a number one. We're going to talk over the next couple of days about some of the potential lack of urgency. The left has urgency because they see that President Trump, they believe he's vulnerable. They see the possibility of impeaching him if they win, of thwarting his entire program, of stopping MAGA, of destroying President Trump and his associates, everything we go back to, even worse than the Pelosi-Biden regime. Since this is, and every time you talk, this is a number one priority, only now being tracked with data centers and flock cameras, why would you wait? Or maybe I'm wrong. Is everything in place if we wanted to do it now, and the White House cleared out some time to brief the president. Could you do everything you're talking about today before the midterms, or just logistically, does it have to wait to afterwards, or is that a political call on your part?
Yeah, and not even a political call, Steve. It's more I'm conceding to what I am presuming the political call is baked in between now and then. And so to your point, right, how do we then start to build the logistics so that we could hit go if let's say it's a couple days after the midterms or the next week and the president says, okay, let's do this thing for real. What my goal is much more simple, which is this is existential. And yet what I'm trying to do is shift the Overton window towards a discussion of the actual logistics at scale that will be required. And so if I can have that impact on the debate so that when the president does snap his fingers and say go, there are good answers available to him.
Jason, I want everybody to read these. What is your coordinates? Because I know a lot of people are probably going to have other follow-on questions, and we'd love to have you back in a couple of days after this has gotten out and been disseminated, because I think you're doing a great public service here. So where do people go to the Daily Caller, get your writings? What's your coordinates for social media, and how do you have DMs or something people can, if they've got questions, besides just put it into your Twitter feed, they can come to you, sir?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me, anybody, and appreciate the follow, is just Twitter at Jason Killmeyer. And by the way, I do read I'm one of those people who does read the comments. I always want the feedback, and so would love to hear from folks.
Okay, War Room Posse. He just told you he reads the comments, so let's load it up. Jason, great second piece. Appreciate all the hard work you've put in thinking this through. And yes, you are definitely getting a conversation going about how do you do mass deportations and what are the logistics at scale to actually accomplish it. So thank you so much for coming on this morning. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Steve.
Make sure you read Troy Myers on the TPS, the 1 million that are available now over the Epoch Times. Get that. Then Daily Caller, Jason Killmeyer, amazing piece, second part of the series. You're seeing a lot of young people get very focused, very serious about some of the most basic controversies and crises facing the country. And so we want to make sure we platform people and that their material is read and shared, most importantly. One thing I want to go make sure Chapter, I've gotten tremendous feedback on this, particularly with all the changes that are occurring in Medicare and with the fiscal consolidation. And I'm not saying we're going to touch Medicare or Social Security, because I don't think that's in this first tranche. Now, maybe Medicaid, but there are changes going on. Part of that's driven by going back to this kind of COVID era funding that was done and getting rid of it. Chapter 845 War Room. You have your own hotline. This is free, no obligation. You get to talk to a consultant on the always confusing and complicated issue of your Medicare plan. So the Chapter people, a database company, go check it out and take care of that today. We've gotten tremendous feedback. I think they've already saved the War Room Posse over $1 million, but most importantly, they've gotten you into optimum plans, which is absolutely essential and key. Patrick K. O'Donnell. The reason we're doing this and fighting to keep this project going forward in the 250th, and I think it's ironic, in the 250th in the basically oldest republic known to man, and I think getting very close to, I guess depending on how long you said they were actually a republic, probably longer than even the Roman Republic, commemorating the birth of this nation, and at least the initial throwdown that we're going to be independent. Now we got to fight for it. People don't really have the details of the fight for it, but you're an expert. August of 1776, I would argue, maybe one of the most important months, maybe even more important than July of 1776 or June in the fight for this nation. Tell me about it, and what are you doing, since you're the greatest combat historian of his generation? What are you doing to commemorate it, sir?
Thank you for your kind words, Steve. I'm going to be joining the Brooklyn GOP for a barbecue and a commemoration of one of the most important small unit actions in American history. And this is where the Marylanders made a series of bayonet charges against a fixed position with General Cornwallis that allowed the bulk of Washington's army to escape to entrenchments in Brooklyn Heights. It was, as one contemporary historian would put it, it was an hour more precious in our history than any other, because it was a distraction that prevented the major wings, which were thousands strong, of the Hessian forces as well as the Crown forces, from uniting and then therefore crushing Washington's defenses at Brooklyn. And had they done that, the revolution would have probably ended that day, because Washington would have been captured, and then there would have been about 10,000 Americans that were captured as well. So this series of bayonet charges against near a stone house is really one of the great, until I wrote the book Washington's Immortals, which is on the Maryland line, was really a truly an untold story. And we were going there on Thursday night, nearly to the hour, Steve, where these men make this bayonet charges. And it's also a very special place because it's near where they fought, but it's also the suspected mass grave of where many of these men, still the remains of some of these men, some of the great families of the South from Maryland, had never come home, and it's their final resting place.
So hold it. 250 years ago, we have 32,000 combat troops basically today, still on Staten Island, including 8,000 mercenaries, Hessians, renowned global badasses, right? They're hired to come over because the Saxony, I think, is broke. They need the cash, and they're farming these guys out. And the Brits realize there's going to be some heavy lifting here, so they're going to get the Germans to help them, although their army is pound for pound as nasty as you can get. They're about to embark to go to Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn and start a massive maneuver warfare to swing around Long Island and then to roll up the army and then get to, really, I guess, through Jamaica and these other thoroughfares, get up to essentially Brooklyn Heights, where Washington's guys have backed up to, which is against the East River. The thing that stops them and slows them down long enough is the American Thermopylae. And just like the Greeks did against the, wait for it, Persians, you hear about that at 1 o'clock today, just like they did at the original Thermopylae, a handful of Spartans, I think, go in and slow them down. That's what these Marylanders were basically. It's kind of go tell the Spartans, right? These guys gave their lives for essentially a holding action that they realized was a suicide mission of time and time again charging to stop these British regulars from advancing, sir?
Well, it's that, as well as also, let me just sort of back up slightly. This is a situation where you have the largest naval armada in history up until this point, as well as almost over half the British Army, as well as this massive Hessian force of over 10,000 men, descend upon North America to crush the rebellion, which is only less than a year old at this, more than a year old at this point, and they're going to crush it militarily. And they descend upon, as you mentioned, Gravesend Bay. They land at Long Island, and they begin to mass. Where Washington divides his army, half of it is in Brooklyn or Long Island, the other half is in Manhattan. He doesn't know where the British are going to land, and it's here that they position about 3,000 men on this rocky spur called the Heights of Gowanus. And this is today's Greenwood Cemetery. And Greenwood Cemetery is kind of the who's who that's buried in New York City, Boss Tweed, etc. And the battle opens up with an action near Greenwood. And it begins on the night of August 26th at the Red Lion Inn. And this is the western gate of Greenwood Cemetery, where there's a mark. It's the hoof of the devil.
Patrick, hang on 1 second. I want to make sure you get lots of runway to do this. Short commercial break. Patrick K. O'Donnell. Remember our revolution. This is the American project, the project that we're trying to hand down to future generations. Patrick K. O'Donnell, Neil McCabe on the other.
Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Texas looming pretty large in this midterm. More about that this afternoon. I have Brian Harrison on also throughout the week. Patriot Mobile 972 Patriot. Call right now. Talk to someone with the East Texas accent. If you want to have a prayer session, do it. They're a Christian company supporting Christian values. Glenn and Jenny Story, two of the best, grassroots leader, best phone service in the world. Find out why. 972 Patriot. Make the change today. If you do, you get a free month. But it's deeper than that. 972 Patriot. Call today. Also, Jim Rickards still has the special, the 1776 special. Go to Rickards Warning. It's a new landing page. Rickards Warning. That's all one word. .com. $17.76. You get 3 months. 3 months for $17.76 of strategic intelligence based upon predictive analytics. Get all the scoop that chairman and CEOs are getting throughout the world. If you don't love it at the end of 3 months, call Jim and say, Jim, I want my money back. You will get returned your $17.76. Best offer they've ever had for his newsletter, Strategic Intelligence. Also, the folks at Natalie Dominguez's team, Home Title Lock, HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Steve, free 14-day trial and $1 million triple lock protection, particularly now with artificial intelligence and cyber. They will also give you a free history on your title. See if anybody's been trying to mess around with it. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Steve. Do it today. These are all sponsors that are there to try to give you as many freebies as possible so you can find out more about their products and their services. And they're also open to you to have direct discussions. So make sure you take advantage of it. Patrick K. O'Donnell. When we get to the punchline, sir, you're going to have this event on Thursday. We're going to cover it because it's that important on the very night of the 250th. It's not simply a mass grave that they're buried in. It's a mass unmarked grave. How did they end up there after the American Thermopylae, sir?
That's one of the enduring mysteries in American history, Steve. We do not know. There were 256 Continental soldiers that were missing after this charge. Many of them were killed. Many of them were captured. And those that were captured would be placed on floating concentration camps in New York Harbor. And most of them would never be seen again. But those that fell nearby, near the Stone House and also near the Michael Raleigh American Legion post, they're suspected of being buried nearby. There's a lot of archaeological digs that were conducted, decades ago. There's evidence that have been gathered where the mass grave of these men are somewhere, and it's probably multiple mass graves within, the underneath a sidewalk or underneath the, some of the, the urban area in the Park Slope area in Brooklyn. And there's also the Gowanus Canal, which is nearby, which was at the time it was a mill pond and a swampy area. And many of these men would have to, when they made the charge, portions of the army also escaped through that. And, it was an extremely treacherous position, and many drowned from the water itself.
How did we, by the way, make the case that this is what, if it had not been for these 256 heroes that willingly gave their lives to stop this onslaught by this incredibly professional British regulars, why did this save the Republic? Because if this hadn't happened and we'd gotten rolled up, the Republic or the independence of the United States would have gone for about less than 60 days, sir.
History and battles often turn on small events, Steve. And this is certainly one of those situations where the actions of a small number of individuals can change history. And this event, like, for instance, at Gettysburg, where you have the first U.S. sharpshooters make a delaying action before, the ground at Little Round Top, minutes more important than any other there. It's very similar here, where a historian of the time would say this is an hour more precious in our history than any other because it's a delaying action. It prevents not only the most important part is it prevents the massive wings of this army from uniting and then going after the American entrenchments at Brooklyn Heights. And had they done that, it would have been the end of the war. And I mean, then it links up to the great American, the American escape, the American Dunkirk, where the Indispensables and Glover's men will ferry the army across the East River. But it's here that in Brooklyn that the army is concentrated and trapped. And if they're able to deliver that crushing blow, it will end the War of Independence. And this story is so precious and important. And I think I have an article out in Breitbart on Wednesday. August 26th is the beginning of the battle, and it begins in the most unique place. It begins in a watermelon patch at the gates of today's Greenwood Cemetery at the Red Lion Inn, where there's a watermelon patch that the owner of the Red Lion Inn plants them for tourists. There's a rock with the hoof of a devil. That's what they say is the local lore. But British scouts are probing that night on the 26th, and they find the watermelons. They try to seize them, but what they do, they end up running into the revolutionary snipers of Edward Hand's Pennsylvanians, who are armed with the Widowmakers of the Pennsylvania long rifles. And these men repel the scouts. It's the first shots of this battle, and then the entire thing unfolds. And what you have is a massive flanking maneuver. As you mentioned earlier, the British, nearly 10,000 strong, are going through the Jamaica Pass, which is largely unguarded by American forces. They move through after seizing several men on horseback that are there to watch the pass, and then they move around the heights of Gowanus, where the Greenwood Cemetery is located, and they come in from behind, and they are surrounding thousands of Americans in this massive flanking maneuver. And these men first repel the British at Greenwood Cemetery, and then they are fighting for their lives, to break out. But it's here near the Stone House, near the Michael Raleigh American Legion post in Park Slope, that they make the American Thermopylae. This is several companies of Marylanders, the Maryland 400, it's called, that are under Lord Sterling, who's an American general, and they are directed to make the charge against the Stone House, and they allow a large portion of the army to escape, but they also prevent these wings from uniting. And as a result, many of them are
300 Spartans.
Are never seen again. Yes.
You had 300 Spartans and you had 400 Marylanders. Real quickly, on Thursday, can the public attend this? Where is it going to be?
Absolutely.
And what kind of access do we have if Warren Posse wants to show up?
It's at the Michael Raleigh American Legion post. You can everybody just go on the Brooklyn GOP website. You can get tickets to go. And we'd love to have the war room. And we start at 5:30, and I'll be speaking at 6, and there'll be a few other speakers, I believe, but I'll be the keynote, sort of laying out what happened that historic day and how the country was saved by these intrepid Marylanders.
Amazing. Can we get the poster up and let's make sure we circulate it? Anybody that wants to get a ticket, it's going to be the American Legion post.
My stuff, it's also on my Twitter handle @Combat Historian. All the books are up there, as well as information on this signing. I also have one at the Society of Cincinnati, which is the oldest patriotic association in D.C. the night before, at the Anderson House Mansion, downtown near DuPont Circle.
Wow.
At 6 p.m. And that's an absolutely spectacular site. The founders, the officers of the line, formed that association right after the war.
Washington's officers. Patrick O'Donnell, where do people go to get your books? The ones Washington's Immortals is the book you want to get of all Patrick's that deals specifically with this battle? Where do folks go to get all your writings, sir?
Barnes and Noble, they usually have it featured. That and Revolutionary Snipers or Amazon.com or independent bookstores. Everybody pretty much has them. And we'll have some number of books at each of the signings on the 26th at the Society of Cincinnati, and then also in Brooklyn at the Michael Rowley American Legion Post.
Patrick K. O'Donnell, we look forward to seeing you later in the week. The battle starts on the 26th. That would be Wednesday. We'll cover this because it's one thing to declare your independence. It's another thing to enforce your independence, and that's what the fighting really starts 250 years ago on Wednesday, or I guess the eve of battle, and then on Thursday. So we'll cover it all. I want to make sure everybody's got opportunity. The War Room Posse joins you in Brooklyn. Thank you, sir.
It was an honor and a privilege.
Patrick
Thank
K.
you,
O'Donnell.
Steve.
Go tell the Spartans. Go tell the Spartans. I want to thank allamericanpharmacy.com. If you want to break the hold and get your own independence, how about declaring your independence from Big Pharma? How about declaring your independence from the drugstore chains that tell you what you got to buy and how you got to buy it? allfamilypharmacy.com/Bannon. Bannon 10, you get 10% off right now. Michael Kunzler and his team is standing by. Or call 561-717-6794. That's 561-717-6794. This is about informed consent and your own medical freedom. Allfamilypharmacy.com. Bannon 10. 10% off. Neil McCabe at the White House. TRITA Parsi is going to join us about the economic war against the Persians next in the War Room.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, in a little over an hour at 1 p.m., about 90 minutes from 1 p.m. from the Treasury Department, Scott Bessent's going to have a briefing and then take questions from the press about this economic D-Day, full-scale economic war against the Persians. Let's play a clip. It's kind of summary of what Scott wrote in the Financial Times over the weekend. Let's go ahead and hear it.
Quote, he said, total financial isolation can obviate the need for American force while enlarging the sphere of freedom for our allies. Later in the op-ed, he writes, the world should understand that our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains the tyrannical regime until Iran stands alone. Now,
okay, Neil McCabe at the White House, your understanding of what's going to be laid out today in about 90 minutes at the Treasury Department. It should be noted, it's not the White House, it's not in the Oval Office, it's not in the Roosevelt Room, it's not in the East Room, it's over at Treasury with Scott Bessent, not Scott Bessent and the President of the United States. Neil McCabe, thoughts?
That's right, Steve. At 1 o'clock, the Treasury building, which is kind of part of the White House campus. It's just to the right of me on the other side of the new ballroom. But Scott Bessent is going to lay out sort of the follow-on to what he called economic fury, which was the initial round of sanctions against Iran. And now he's going after the shippers, the banks, the countries that are sort of being the go-between. Just like Galinsky said that, the radicals, your most important enemy is the people in the middle because they stall you, they confuse you, and they waste your time. And Bessent today is going to say there's no longer a middle. You're either with us or against us. And that's going to be sort of the general message. But obviously, he'll go into the specifics, the banks, the shippers, the refineries, and targeting China. In his summit with President Xi, President Trump said that Xi had given him a free hand in Iran, but that has not been the case, Steve. And so we're going to see how that plays out also at the Treasury today, 1 p.m. And we'll be carrying it live, sir.
Okay. Yeah, and Neil McCabe will be there, and then Neil will be back with us at 5 o'clock. Neil, stick around. I want to go to TRITA Parsi. TRITA, you've been with us since the very beginning of this, and it's kind of odd sequencing. Normally, you would think you would do the economic part first and try to get to some diplomatic solution. Here, we kind of went kinetic and big kinetic, and now we're back to economic war. But according to Scott Bessent, you heard the statement right there. This is going to be full on, essentially quarantining the Persian economy from the world. Sir, your thoughts and observations on this?
Well, first of all, this again shows that 6 months into this war, everything that has been said so far about bringing it to an end has proven false. Remember, when the blockade of the blockade was imposed back in April, we were told that it's going to take about 13 days before the Iranian economy collapses. 4 months, 5 months later, we're still here, and now we're talking about D-Day. We've seen this movie before. We've seen this pattern before. This belief that some sort of a economic measure or military measure will deal a knockout blow to the other side, and we don't have to deal with the messiness of a negotiation, and none of them have come through. It's important to also understand, Iran has been under US sanctions for more than 40 years. You were there when maximum pressure was imposed, and that too was supposed to bring about all of these different changes, and it didn't. We've had these type of embargo-style sanctions on Cuba for several decades, and here we are. They're still there, and now we're talking about an invasion. I mean, Bessent said that the economic warfare would essentially not, would make military action unnecessary. But yet it was military action that became necessary, apparently, in Venezuela, even though we had this type of sanctions on the Venezuelans. All the research, incidentally, shows that economic sanctions are not an alternative to war. They actually increase the likelihood of military action. And what I think likely will happen here is either A, these sanctions will not be that particularly effective because it's all about implementing existing sanctions, which means that you're actually pressuring third countries, as I think your reporter also pointed out. And that's going to be tough because a lot of these different countries have very little margins, and they're too dependent on having some deal of a trade with Iran. And it's also going to be very costly enforcement-wise. Or it actually does work, and the Iranians are really, really pressed. What happens then? Well, then we're back to square one. When they're really pressed, will they escalate or will they capitulate? And everything we have seen so far is that they choose to escalate. In fact, they have great escalation options still at their disposal. And I think we've seen a clear pattern in which they are fearing one thing more than anything else, and that's capitulation. They fear capitulation far more than they fear war. And I fear that this is just going to be another cycle. What I'm really worried about is that we're not seeing any demands from the US side. It's not saying, well, we're going to do this unless you agree to X, Y, and Z. And if you agree to X, Y, and Z, we're going to lift the sanctions. There are no demands. Look at Bessent's FT op-ed. There's no demands. So this just ends up becoming a part of the escalatory spiral rather than something that ends this conflict.
Talk to me for a second about because you've often talked about the folks in charge. It appears to an outsider that you now have a hardened, tough, younger kind of military junta that's running the deal. It seems like maybe the Ayatollah and the mullahs are not as directly involved in things as the post-decapitation Revolutionary Guard with younger, tougher commanders. Is that essentially what we're dealing with? We're dealing now with essentially a militarized state. This is a military junta, and these guys are going to fight it out to the end?
It is, in many ways, an increasingly militarized state. Yes, I wouldn't call them a junta, though, because junta kind of gives the impression that there's some sort of a clique of people that are kind of completely disconnected from the rest of society. If there's anything we should have learned out of these last 6 or so months, is that this is a system that they have there. And you can actually take out 1/3 of their top leaders and the system remains. If it was a junta, it would have collapsed by now. So I think that simplifies it in a way that make this sound much easier than it actually is. I think we also have to be very humble in the fact that we just don't know exactly how decisions are being made. Several of the people that are now have been put into key positions are actually of the older guard. They're not, not to say that they're not tough, etc., but they're actually of the older guard, not the younger set of officers that had risen up during the war itself. So it's not entirely clear to me whether this is a policy indication or it was just politics that was being played out here in terms of these different designations. But I think the overall picture, I think, is very clear, which is that this is currently a system that has decided that it had played too much of a restrained and passive role in the past, and now it's going to be much more aggressive, much more risk-taking. We saw them even attack American bases in Jordan, not in retaliation of an American attack, which had been the pattern up until that point, but now themselves actually taking the initiative. And all of this, I think, adds to a picture, completes a picture that says, if these sanctions actually are effective in squeezing the Iranians, the most likely response is a counter-escalation by them, which most likely will bring us back into a third round of the war.
Number one, I thought the Department of War has been telling us that their offensive capabilities have been eviscerated. Are you saying that in this militarized state, either through reinforcement, through Pakistan, the Chinese Communist Party, whatever, are you saying as we sit here in late August that their offensive capability, whether drones, missiles, combat troops, ability to project power, has not been eviscerated?
Not in the slightest. I mean, okay, perhaps slightest is too strong of a word. There have been some reductions, but just take a look what happened in the second round of the war. You know, one of the key things with that attack in Jordan was not that they could hit Jordan. We knew that. They've been hitting Israel. You reported it yourself how effective they had been there. But what was really, I think, shocking to the US side on this was that something was going on at that base, something very sensitive. And the Iranians found out right away. They had real-time intelligence. And then they struck the base, effectively getting through all of the layers of air defense systems, and did a significant amount of damage. I suspect, I don't have data on this, but I suspect that it was part of the success the Iranians had. They destroyed about 1/3 of the arsenal of the US's MQ-3 Reapers, these drones, very expensive drones at the cost of $1.5 billion. But the issue was that unlike before, when they had satellite images that they probably purchased from the Chinese that gave an idea of what was going on at a base 10 days ago, 7 days ago, and then they used that to strike. Now they were using intelligence that was raw, which means, I mean, it was real-time intelligence. They knew exactly what was going on at an American base at the time that it was going on, and they struck then. So when you take a look at the larger picture, we're not seeing a situation in which their capabilities have been, completely destroyed, and as a result, they don't have any choice but to capitulate or surrender. We're seeing the opposite. So to see that opposite and then still believe that their capabilities have blown away, it just doesn't make any sense.
The theory of the case here, I think, and I want to walk you through both and see which one you think is more practical. Is theory of the case is that in January, when Scott was off the chain, particularly in destroying the currency and other things, that's when you had this 1 million people take to the streets, and somewhere between 20 and 40,000 were killed by the regime. That the regime, more so than bombing, more so than a strategic bombing, which a lot of the intelligence community said would happen and obviously didn't, that you really had the possibility of regime collapse because of economics and people take to the streets. Now, people today about this, Mark Levin and others particularly, the kind of the Israel First or the Greater Israel Project, say, hey, try your economic sanctions now, but they're making your point. These guys are still locked and loaded, and eventually we're going to have to get back to kinetic war. Of those two outlooks, which one do you think has a higher probability? Because Scott Bessent is clearly in the first camp that said, let me take it's pretty obvious today the Department of War is going to take a backseat to this. Treasury is going to run this war at least for a while. Do you think his theory of the case is correct, or are really Mark Levin and that crowd saying you can do all you want, but you're going to end up, we don't care what you do with the Chinese Communist Party, we don't care how many blockades you've got. Eventually, this militarized state is still gearing for a fight. They still got weapons, and they're going to still try to project power, so we're going to have to get down on it sometime in the future, sir.
They're both wrong. They're right, perhaps, in the diagnosis. So, for instance, saying that, yes, they're going to fight back. Yes, I agree with that. I also don't agree with the idea that Bessent believes that this is going to bring about some sort of a collapse. But they're both wrong in thinking where this will lead things, or that there isn't a third option. There is a third option, and that is to have genuine diplomacy. It's going to be very tricky. Trump is not the person who necessarily has the patience for it, but it is what it is, and you're going to have to deal with it. Because we wouldn't be going back to economic warfare if we actually believed that the military warfare had been successful. We're just going back and forth between different type of coercive options, none of them which have led to anything that can be described as a strategic win in 6 months, even though this was supposed to be over with in just 4 days. And when it comes to what Bessent did back in December, yes, again, we have another example in which the US can squeeze the economy of a country tremendously. And what he was doing with the currency is a key reason as to why those protests began. I think the initial protests were all about the currency. Later on, it morphed into something much, much bigger. But the Iranian government clamped that down in 2 days and killed a very large number of people. And reinstated control within just a couple of days. And they closed down the internet in a manner that we've never seen any economy or any country being closed down in the past. So the idea that that pressure would lead to that collapse, we haven't seen evidence for that. We're confusing impact with success.
Hang on for 1 second. We're just going to go to commercial break. I want to finish this up. Make sure you get plenty of runway. TRITA Parsi joins us about the economic war against the Persians.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
So, TRITA, you've had a pretty good track record here in the War Room of having a pretty deep understanding of what's going on. Number one, given that this is going to happen in about an hour from Treasury, our own Neil McCabe, who's at the White House, is going to be there, do it live. How do you think this part of it plays out? And what would be your recommendation if both sides and a lot of people in the United States saying it's time to wrap this thing up, particularly if we can guarantee they're not going to have a nuclear weapon? How does this play out, and what's your recommendations?
Look, if some of these things end up becoming effective, so for instance, the administration feels very confident that they have managed to restore a lot of traffic in the Persian Gulf right now by using these VLCCs that can take up to 2 million barrels of oil a day. With that, you only need to get about 5 of them out in a day, and then you've covered half of the previous traffic. You have another 5 million barrels going through land pipelines through Saudi Arabia, a little bit out of Emirates, and then you're kind of back to roughly where it was before the war. And as a result, this leverage of closing the strait is largely taken away from the Iranians. Let's assume that that is correct. I'm not entirely convinced that it is or that it's sustainable, but let's assume that that is correct. If that is the case, that means the US is now in a stronger position of leverage. But what do you do with that leverage? If you're not using it by going back to the negotiations and actually try to get a deal that you're happy with, then all you're doing is just playing another role, another cycle in this escalatory cycle between the two sides. And this is what I'm particularly worried about, because the Trump administration has not said what it is that they actually want at this point. And if they don't make that clear, the assumption on the Iranian side is going to be, okay, they just want complete capitulation. They're never going to agree to that. So their response then will be counter-escalation. And then we'll go through yet another one of these cycles. And before you know it, we're already at the midterms. So I think the thing is, if you have leverage, cash it in at the negotiations.
Okay, let me ask you before, I know you got to bounce. If you've had this kind of combat hardened younger guys, and they got some older guys too, but it's really, in your words, a militarized state, are we talking to the right people? Are we meeting with the right people? Or who are the right people in your mind that are the people that, as I say, not just can make a deal, but can execute and deliver on that deal, sir?
Look, this is a problem that both sides have with each other. I think we are talking to the right people because we're talking to the negotiators. Do the negotiators make the final decisions? No, they do not. It's a larger system, and within that system, the IRGC is dominant. The Iranians are saying the same thing. They're talking to their negotiators on this side, Kushner and Witkoff. Part of the reason why they wanted someone else involved is because they saw that Witkoff and Kushner could not deliver Trump, who was the ultimate decision maker. When there were negotiations back in February, in which there was a deal on the table that I think actually would have been a huge victory for the United States, Kushner and Witkoff told the Iranians that they think Trump is going to accept this and that they're going to work on convincing him. But they failed. Instead, there was war. So the Iranians are asking themselves the exact same question. The issue is, there's no other option. You're going to have to deal with the people that comes to the negotiating table, but knowing very well they're not the ultimate decision makers, and that there's a system on the other side that we don't have full insight into, in which the decisions are being made. But the only ones you can negotiate with are the negotiators. There's been attempts by the US to reach out directly to the IRGC. Apparently, that has not been something that the IRGC agreed to because their system doesn't allow it. Their system says the negotiators have to deal with the negotiations. So I think we're getting stuck on these questions too often. Instead of realizing this is what it is, let's just make sure that the negotiations are successful without having any naive beliefs that the foreign minister, for instance, would be the ultimate decision maker. That is almost never the case in a negotiation.
TRITA, where do people get your information? Where do they go for your writings, your Twitter feed, all of it, particularly as this thing after this afternoon, I'm sure is going to heat up, sir?
Yes, they can go to the Quincy Institute's website, which is quincyinst.org. I write a lot about this just in the last week on my Substack, which is very simple, tritaparsi.substack.com. And then they can also follow me on Twitter, which is tparsi.
TRITA, thanks for carving out time.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Steve.
Today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, TRITA. Appreciate you. I just want to make sure that on Thursday, we're going to commemorate what's called the American Thermopylae of these Maryland heroes that stopped for a while the British roll-up of the American Army in Long Island all the way back to Brooklyn Heights and saved our republic. It's called the American Thermopylae. The original Thermopylae was the Greeks versus the Persians. So the West has been at this for a while, folks. Just take your number 2 pencil out and write that down. This has been an ongoing struggle. Neil McCabe, you're about to head over to Treasury. Closing thoughts and observations about TRITA, what you've heard today from the White House, and as you head over to Treasury to cover this at 1 p.m.
I just want to make the point that, China day from, importing. Now it's down to 8. So they're feeling some of the pinch. They had a 5-month supply, but they've been sharing it with their neighbors. And so that 5-month supply is dwindling. And so we'll see how the Chinese respond to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent today. But the Iranians have already sort of pre-buttled the announcement, and they're saying that there will be seismic consequences for those people who cooperate with the United States and this return of economic fury, Steve.
Yeah, they are not happy. The regime itself is going crazy about what's about to happen. But McCabe, where do people get you? What are your coordinates, sir?
You can find me on all the socials at Reporter McCabe and check out my groundbreaking columns at the South Shore Press.
The Neil McCabe. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Okay, Charlie Kirk's show is next with Andrew Covette, Poso at 2, Gruber at 3, Bowling at 4. We're back here from 5 to 7 tonight. We're already got the show packed. We're going to have response on what's happening on this economic war, plus so much more. Data centers, flock cameras, surveillance, intensity of support for President Trump in the MAGA movement throughout the country. America's health share, if your health insurance, or really medical insurance now, is out of control, it is for so many people, there's an alternative. America's health share. The operative word there is share. Find out about it. freedomforhealth.org. freedomforhealth.org/Bannon. Get all the information. Talk to the people that run the company. Do your due diligence. This may be an alternative that is attractive and right for you. That is freedomforhealth.org/Bannon. Go check it out today. Charlie Kirk is next. We'll toss it to them. We'll see you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time when you will be back in the War Room.